Olá, você que nos acompanha aqui nas redes do Instituto Brasil-Israel. Eu sou o João Torquato, sou da comunicação aqui do IB e também apresentador do podcast E Eu Com Isso. Hoje estamos aqui com o filósofo, professor, diretor do Departamento de Estudos Afro-Judaicos, músico, crítico gastronômico, com o Lewis Gordon. Lewis, it's a pleasure to be with you.
It's a pleasure to be with you
here. And I want to start this interview asking how are your days here in Brazil and how is your experience at the festival in the Jewish Museum?
This is my fifth visit to Brazil. Every visit I've had to Brazil is great. My first was in Salvador and in Cachoeira, but I also spent time in Sao Leopoldo. I spent time in the Andes, in the mission area with the indigenous communities. And this is my second time in Sao Paulo. And the first time I spoke from MASPs. I was delighted to see I'm just down the street.
Yeah.
And I must say my experience with the Jewish Museum is wonderful. It's an extraordinary community. A community of generosity, love, commitment. And I also like that they're not insular. It's a community that understands that this is about Jews in Brazil, and Jews in Brazil are Brazilian and connect to the wider community, which connects to my view of Jewish life, which is for Jewish life to be loving, communal, relational, sharing.
And yesterday in the Jewish Museum, you start saying that your blackness, it's not separated for your Jewishness. Why?
Well, several reasons. One is autobiographical. I'm from Jamaica. All the Jews I knew in Jamaica were like, in Jamaica, whether you're light-skinned or dark-skinned, you're Jamaican. But because the national identity is black, even the light-skinned people identify as black. So because of that, I never heard any of my Jewish relatives say, I am not black. And because of that, there was never a moment of contradiction. So that's the autobiographical point. The other part is more philosophical and political. The philosophical is that blackness doesn't work with purity. Whoever you are, there's a place for you in black communities. So if a person is mixed with Asian, European, mixed in any way, they could live in a black community. It is white worlds that tell people, stay out, you're not pure. So blackness is open. Now Jewishness, historic Jewishness was open. Closing Jewishness was something imposed on Jewish communities. Now it's tricky because there are Jews who want to be closed. But Jewish ethics say you must remember you're not God. You don't control everything. Jewish ethics says to be a Jew, you have to take the responsibility for ethical life. That's why we carry Torah. Okay? So I see Jewishness as a commitment to ethical life. I see blackness as a commitment to ethical life where when it takes on power is political life. So for me, when I fight for what is right, when I think about liberation, when I think about struggle, I think simultaneously as Black and Jew. The last part is historical. A lot of people don't realize how much of what we come to know as Judaism has its history in East Africa and what we call West Asia. And the Jews I'm from were born in Jerusalem. That's where they're from. But that doesn't tell you much. And why I say it doesn't tell you much is because people in Jerusalem weren't frozen. So my relatives who moved to Jamaica in the 19th century were, back then it was only Palestine, they were Palestinian Jews, but the family were from what was called Palestine, Egypt, Syria, and Ethiopia. And that tells you a lot about earlier Jewish communities. That's my mother's father's family.
So it's half Sephardim, half Mizrahim, and half Beta Israel.
Oh, no, correct. And then my mother's mother's family, my mother was Jewish on both sides. My mother's mother's family were Sephardic from Ireland. So you see my point.
Was Jews that moved from Spain to Ireland? Oh, okay.
And then to Jamaica as part of the coconut processing business. But the main thing is those Jews, because they weren't closed, were open to many other communities. That is why my father's family is Chinese. My mother's family includes Tamil Indians, Liberians, many communities. Because in Jamaica, if you ask all of them, even my Afro-Chinese father, he's Chinese and he's Black. So the thing that we should remember is that when I think about certain things, and because I'm a scholar, I also know about ancient East Africa. And there's so many things in Judaism that many people don't know are what you find in East African practices. Okay? I know people are going to know, for example.
Yeah. And there's this historical relationship between the Black movement and the pro-Palestine cause, mainly through the lens of an anti-colonial struggle. However, there is often a reading of the Jews as exclusively white, and also the denial of the blackness of a Black Jew. How do you think that we can face this debate? That the part of Black movement that think that only existence white Jews in Israel.
That is part of propaganda, but there are several things. Okay, first thing is Jews were not historically white. Colonialism created whiteness for Jews because people who are not, but specifically European Jews, because we forget there are many Jews who are not from Europe. So for European Jews, the colonies needed lighter people. They had, as you know, in Brazil, there's branqueamento. In other parts of Latin America, blanqueamento. And so, although Jews come in many shades, many kinds, certain Jews wanted full citizenship. And the argument was, if you could have a religion that separates you from your race, then you could say your religion is Judaism, but your race is white. Okay? The problem with that is that it doesn't match actual Jewish history. So there's some things that the audience should know. The first thing is any group, not only Jews, but Blacks, indigenous peoples, any group, your voice is affected by the power of the empire you're in. So if you look at, say, the history of Jewish peoples, and you notice I say peoples, there was a time when some were in the Babylonian empires. There are people and it's complicated. I'll just say Jewish peoples now because it's a short time. We don't have to go through a lot of history. But Greek empires, Roman empires, and then when you had the caliphates or the Ottoman Empire, uh, Arabic speaking and Jews became very well known. Spanish Empire, Spanish speaking Jews. Portuguese speaking Jews. Well, then the French and the British Empire, those Jews dominated. And in those places, the dominant populations were light-skinned and became known as white. Okay? But there were other empires. In Kaifeng, if you meet a Jew, they're going to look Chinese. If you're in India, if you meet a Jew, they're going to look Indian, which is Cochin Jews. Beta Israel, if you're in Ethiopia, but not just there, Sudan, Somalia. If you were to go to Uganda, Abiyudaya, it's going to be a dark-skinned black person. If you see Igbo Jews in Nigeria, you see where I'm going with this. Many places. But here's the thing. Colonialism made the world such that a lot of different groups pop up. But the thing about it is that some of what you say in your story, for instance, a lot of my experiences are of being the first black person in almost everywhere. Okay? But a lot of times I'm also the first Jewish person, right? And some people don't even realize this, right? And then there are different contexts, but there are several things, right? A lot of people don't, even many Jews don't know Jewish history, okay? So there are a lot of movements. For instance, when you see the Rastafari movement, a lot of people don't know that the advisor to Marcus Garvey was Jewish. He was an Ethiopian rabbi, Rabbi Ford. And a lot of people don't understand how the intimate relationship of Jewish movements and what became known as black movements evolved. But one of the things that's funny is you may have experienced this. When we travel, have you traveled outside of Brazil?
No, not yet.
Okay, when you do, you'll experience this. I've traveled all over the world. When I'm in it, I'll tell two funny stories, right? The first one was my eldest son, he just wants to be black. End of story, black. And one time we were flying to France, but we had to connect in Iceland. And there were people requesting not to sit next to us on the plane, all kinds of things. And my son was very upset. They're racist. These people, look how they treat black people. And I said to my son, I don't think this time is because we're black. And he said, what are you talking about? We're obviously black. I said, I don't know. And then when the plane landed, an old man walked up and said, what is the problem with you Arabs? Why are you at war? And so forth. And my son was shocked. Now, many people are looking at this. If they're Arabs looking at this, they'll look at you and they'll look at me. And they will, if we were walking the street, a lot of them would associate us with the Arab world. You'll experience that when you travel. But when I travel, what I've learned is that there are people who also can spot that I'm of Tamil Indian ancestry. They come up and speak Tamil. There are people, in fact, one time, this is the second story. One time I traveled, I got on a plane and a woman turned to me. It was an East Indian woman. She talked to me as a black person because I was in New York. When I connected in Dubai, I got on a plane and a Tamil East Indian family looked at me and they said, coming home for the holidays? And then when I landed in Trivandrum, I went to get a rickshaw or taxi, right? And the guy looks at me, he goes, are you Arab? And I said, why do you ask? He said, no, I just thought you were Arab. And so I told the audience, I left the US black, I connected Tamil, and I arrived Arab. All are true. Because I am of Mizrahi, and, background, I am black, and I am of Tamil Indian background. So sometimes people will see some of who you are. I figured the sound. But anyway, the thing to understand is some people see it as exclusion. But the story I just told is of inclusion. Because people are trying to figure out what part of you connect. If they hate you, they're looking at the part of you that will push you away. So that's one thing. Now, they're in political stuff. There are people, it's not just in black movements. You see, in a lot of North American black movements, remember yesterday I said people think their blacks are the blacks, their Jews are the Jews. There are more black people in South America than in North America. More black people in the Caribbean.
Brazil is the country with more black people outside the Africa continent.
Correct. But when people talk about black people, they only talk about from the United States. That's because the United States is the world imperial force. It's the most powerful country. So those black people have a loud voice. But here's the point. Because they have a loud voice, they think their black experience is the only one. And they think their Jews are the only one. In the United States, 95%, maybe more, but when I last looked, that's what they said, of people who are publicly identified as Jews also identify as white. So that's why in the US, those blacks see Jews as white. Similarly, they talk a lot about Israel. But if you go to Israel, you see, and I've been to Israel, and I've also been to Palestine, the territories. And when I'm there, I see people who identify, and you look at them as Mediterranean, Arab, East African, Sephardic, many other kinds. A lot of people don't know the majority of Jews who went there were from Arab areas like Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Yemen. In fact, many people would take you for Yemeni.
Yeah.
And Iraq, all those places. So that's the first part, right? So I have to explain to Jews in Israel, not the people who visit, the people who've always lived there, that outside of Israel, many people look at them as white people, so forth, and they get shocked, okay? That's one issue. The other issue is that some people want Jews to be white people because it's easier to hate them if you hate white people. Because then they could say it's a struggle against white supremacy. Jews like you and me create a problem for them. In fact, what they want to say is, first they want to say we convert. So they act like we're race traders or something. I was like, no, I'm born Jewish. Second, some people would like to have an exclusive story. So for instance, if you're a black Christian and your mother's white, a lot of people call you black. But because they want Jews to be white, if your mother is a white identified Jew, then they start putting other things on you. I create problems for many people because when I show pictures of my mother, she's a dark-skinned black woman, right? And it's interesting because as we know, when you look at families, sometimes some children are darker, some are lighter, and so forth. When I look at my mother and her brothers, her sisters, there are many colors, okay? So the first thing is we have to take very seriously. Yesterday I said anti-Semitism is also a racism. I don't like to deal with the religion. Most people who hate Jews don't know Jewish religion. But the thing about it is going to be the question of how we identify. And when I created the Center for Afro-Jewish Studies, I met Jews of every kind, okay? So there's several things. When you're a black Jew, you're fighting many struggles. And if our audience is a lot of Jews, they'll get this. The ones who are not Jewish, I'll explain it. In Judaism, right, in the spring, we have Pesach. People know it as Passover. We have a Seder. And in the Seder, we talk about slavery and liberation, okay? Now, what's interesting...
We sing Ava de Maíno, right?
Correct.
We are slavers.
Correct. And so the thing is, when you're a black Jew, you don't think about way back when you were in Egypt. You think about slavery recently, and especially if you're in Brazil, the last country to make it illegal It's really recent. But you also think about slavery now. There are black people being enslaved across the African continent and Asia and in the Americas. And so we don't look at slavery as remote. So for us, liberation and fighting against slavery and colonialism, we have to take seriously. Now, some Jews are afraid of addressing colonialism because a lot of people put it into the context of Israel-Palestine. And to them, I think they're making a mistake. I think Jews must address colonialism because if we're going to carry Torah, we have an ethical responsibility to other human beings. And so every black Jew have to take that seriously, but I think every Jew. Now, the reason some Jews, the ones who identify as white, want to focus so much on anti-Semitism, but don't want it to be a racism, is because they want to eat their cake and have it too. They want to be white, but to be white is actually not to be a race. People say there's a white race, but truth is when you talk about things, people presume white without race. When you say human, they presume white. But at the same time, they want to deal with the fact that Jews are discriminated against. But when they try to reach that religion, as I said, most people don't know Jewish religion. People look at me walking, they're figuring, why is his hair that way? And, I went through an illness why I used to cover my head all the time. But then I said, oh, I survived. But I still won't go into a synagogue or a graveyard without wearing kippot, or in this case, my kippot, which is a cool one. This is from South Africa, right? So the thing is, if we think about it, what I would say is it's important for you or people like me to just say who we are and actually go through the conflict and the struggle to give a truer understanding of human beings, including those of us who are Jewish. And I argue there's no contradiction between being black and being Jewish. Just like if I met a Korean Jew, I would say there's no contradiction. If I met an indigenous American Jew, their indigenous people are Jewish and people don't understand why. And people say, how are you Jewish? Well, some convert, but some, they didn't convert at all. Their mother is Jewish. And some Jewish communities is through your father. Now, although my background is from what people would call Orthodox communities, because of, Sephardi and Israeli. And that's funny too, because we break a lot of rules for Orthodox, right? But that construction is from Europeans. But the thing is, I just take the view that if your family is Jewish and you practice Judaism, or you're committed, for me, it doesn't have to be a religion. For me, political activists who never been in a synagogue don't pray. If they identify as Jews, I respect them and accept them. For me, they're Jews.
And you talked about colonialism, and yesterday we talked about Fanon and how complicated it is to bring his reading to the present day, since there is a justification for anti-colonial speech. I would like you to talk a little about of the people that bring the speech of Fanon to the present days and justify a war against the colonial state, the white colonial state of Israel.
Well, there's several things. First thing is, a lot of people think simply using people's name will justify their position. When the fact of the matter is, they freeze these people in the past. Some people cite Nelson Mandela, for instance. But the thing is, Nelson Mandela accepted the existence of the state of Israel. If you go into any of Fanon's writing, you don't find a single sentence where he says that the existence of Israel is illegitimate, even in the damned of the earth, the damned de la terre. So they'll have to deal with that. But that doesn't answer anything because Fanon died in 1961 at the age of 36. I don't know what Fanon would think today. So I have to just talk about the Fanon I understood. And last night I mentioned Fanon was against anti-Semitism. He was part of the groups who liberated people from concentration camps. And Fanon even said in Le Dernier de la Dire, he saw Israel as connected to reparations for World War II. And he added in a footnote that the reparations are not really fulfilled. So if he was, you know what I mean, against that, he had ample place to say this. But here's the thing. Some people are disingenuous. They bring up apartheid, right? Let's say that Israel and Palestine found a way to agree to have two states and a confederate situation, a federation like the European Union, where everybody could go back and forth. There's now no apartheid, right? You got it? Because you see, internal to Israel, there's Jaffa, there's Haifa, there is a whole complicated history about Palestinians in Israel. And that story is even more complicated because a lot of the people who voted for the right-wing government were Arab Jews from Arab countries. And the reason is, and this is what I'm getting at, a lot of Arab countries have practiced apartheid. So the people who are saying they're against apartheid, they have to answer, why are they going to raise, and now I'm against apartheid, so I want to make that clear. But they have to explain, why do they ally with people in countries who practice apartheid? Because they're against apartheid in Israel. That's a double standard. And what I would say to that is, it's because ultimately apartheid isn't the real issue. If you're against the existence of Israel, just say so. Israel could be the kindest country in the world. They may not want it. In some of the other countries, they're against Israel because they would like the entire area to be under Islam and to be Arabic. Okay? So as long as there is a non-Islamic state, they will fight against it. Now, I have a more radical position, as you know. My position is I'm against all nation states. If I'm against all nation states, then why should I be more against Israel than against other nation states? I take the position that nation states create illegal people, and it's difficult to have nation states. Nation states don't fit the 21st century. That's my position. So it becomes oversimplified if people are going to say a colonial state, when in fact they defend other colonial states. I find it hypocrisy. If you're going to be against colonialism, be against it. If you're going to be against theocracies, right, religious states, do it. But if you're going to say the only ones you're against are the Jewish ones, it's called anti-Semitism. So if we're going to address these then, I take a different position. First, the problem I have is that historically, even when Israel wasn't right-wing, there were people against Israel. When Israel became more right-wing, and again, as I said, a lot of the Arab Jews are the ones who voted for this, is because they remember what it's like to live in these other countries that avowed Islamicist, Arab-centered rule. That's why they fled. So that's their position, right? But the problem with putting in a right-wing state is a right-wing state, all right-wing states are premised upon enemies. And the right-wing state makes Palestinians into enemies. And not only that, the right-wing state encourages settlers to go on Palestinian land to make Israeli soldiers go in and have in Palestinian land Palestinian people not being treated with respect. That is absolutely an abomination. So that is clear. But you notice what I'm saying. That's called expansionism. If Israel said, this is Israel, settlers, go back and where you belong, right? If you're going to play nation state, stay in your nation state. That's the first problem. Now the second part. If you're going to say you're going to have nation states, why can't Palestinians have a nation state? Again, I'm against nation states, but I'm not against Palestinians having their nation state because we're in a world that puts privileges to nation states. As long as Palestinians don't have a nation state, they are politically and structurally inferior. I'm against making human beings inferior. There's a word for that, racism. Okay? So now let's go for Palestinian states. If you're going to have a Palestinian nation state, if the state is defined as a state without Jews, in other words, no Jew can live in a Palestinian nation state, that's also a racial state. But the thing is, and again, I don't live in Israel. I don't live in Palestine. So everything I say is an observation as an outsider. I don't want to tell people in Israel how to live or in Palestine, okay? I'm just observing this. So we have a right-wing Israel right now that is encouraging policies of expansion. If you have a Palestinian state that is premised upon a nation state, which is what it would be, if its position is that to be authentically a Palestinian state, it must be an Islamic state and it must be exclusively Arab, you're going to then have a right-wing state. Okay? Now you have a problem. Okay. Now you have two right-wing states. However, it doesn't have to be that way. And now there's a third possibility. A third possibility is another right-wing state called a theocracy. And the danger is that all right-wing states lead to theocracies and racism. And we're seeing that. There are people who support Palestine, but they don't support Palestine if Palestinians don't identify with being Arab. Palestinians are a complex mixed people.
With Christians, Muslims, a lot of religions.
Many kinds. I'm of Palestinian ancestry. I wouldn't count if they're and unless I affirm my Arab identity. So that's where those issues come in, right? Those are the right-wing ones. And right-wing states, when they're based on war, there's only one solution. You go back to the Israel one. If it's enemies, get rid of Palestinians. That's what they're doing, the right wing. If it's the right-wing Palestinian, it's very simple. Get rid of Jews. You see what I'm getting at? If it's the theocracy, get rid of not only anyone who's not part of your religion, but also get rid of secular people and pretty much try to get a version of your society that belongs probably in the Middle Ages. Okay, so those are. But then there's a fourth possibility. And this is what I argue for, and this is what I think Fanon would argue for. Remember, I said that Fanon hated violence, but he took the position if you do nothing about violence, you're complicit with violence. That's nonviolence. He believed in anti-violence, but anti-violence is to create a society where its institutions, its rules, fight against violence. And that is called politics. In other words, Fanon supported having political solutions. And here's how much he supported it. Fanon fought in wars. Fanon, as we know, not only in World War II, he was part with the FLN. But the few years before he died, he was trying to organize African states to have political solutions. He became an ambassador to Ghana. He wanted to be an ambassador to Cuba. In other words, he was training himself and organizing with people to develop political remedies. So here's what my position is, and this is what I think Fanon would be. But again, I don't want to speak for him because he died 62 years ago.
It's like to ask to Moses what's the opinion about the mobile phones.
Yeah, it's right. But here's what I think. Because Fanon always argued that you needed political solutions to political problems. We're living in a moment where all right wings prefer military solutions to political problems. This is one of the reasons why, if you look at the conflict today, I knew when Saudi Arabia was trying to normalize relations with Israel, that something terrible was going to happen. Hamas is very clear. It does not want to have political solutions to the conflict. It wants war. The right wing in Israel is similar. They don't want political solutions. They want war. And we're seeing the devastation that creates. It's clear to me that this is a political problem. And if you find political solutions, it requires building a future of coexistence. But here's the danger now. It is pretty clear that there's a lot of bad faith from Israel. I already know Hamas is clear. It wants war. There are people who are against it. A lot of I think some of the people who did the early October attack imagined the Arab states will come in, they'll all beat up Israel, blah, blah, blah. They could have World War III. They find themselves at a cliff. Nobody's supporting them. But unfortunately, the right wing in Israel did not see it as a tragedy. They saw it as an opportunity. Why do I say this? First, there's no way you're going to bomb buildings and not kill people who are not Hamas. Second, Israel already knew, everybody knew where the tunnels are. Remember the last Gaza conflict? We saw the tunnels. Everybody knows where the tunnels are. So it's bizarre we're having this debate. Third, when the United States sent in its warship, why didn't it send in a hospital ship? Why didn't the European Union send in hospital ships? If you're in a war with military people under hospitals and schools, have a viable way for people to get out. You see what I'm saying? Why have a way that have so many people killed? Next, and this is very important, if it's about the hostages, why not start with negotiating a trade of prisoners to reduce, and that way the moral and political challenges on Hamas. Why kill so many people, then ask for it? And I think part of it is connected to another problem that Israel faces. Okay? The other problem that Israel faces is that it makes a promise that no country can deliver on. And that promise is to be the safest place on earth for Jews. Nobody can promise to be the safest place for anybody, any country. None can deliver. And because that is a lie, it's an impossibility, the government has to convince people that it can still be a safe place for Jews by becoming the most fierce, military, awe-struck killer that people could see. In other words, it's like going to your neighbor because he hurt one of your children and burning down the entire house instead of doing what I said last night. Remember the story I told that when Fanon was a little boy, he badly hurt some of his neighbors' sons because he had a razor blade. And everything was escalating. And the father wants now to hurt the children, right? And the mothers were like, the children have to fight. But Casimir Fanon, Fanon's father, went over there with a bottle of wine and talked with the father, that's politics, and develop a relationship that led to the boys, the different houses, ended up becoming best friends. You know, when my daughter took her genetics tests, it showed, and it's not to say that's the exclusive thing. If you're a religious Jew, genetics have nothing to do with it. But it reveals is everything I told her was true. Our family history points to Palestine/Israel, Ethiopia, right? Egypt, those areas, and also Liberia, because I mentioned this, but it pointed exactly where in Ireland, in Scotland, those areas. It showed Pondicherry, India, and Guangdong, China, right? But the point is, a lot of it showed what is today Israel-Palestine. I'm sure there are many people who are Jewish who can show, I'll repeat. I'm sure there are many people who are Jewish where they go and do this, who can show that they're descended from people from there. Just like many people who say, I'm not Jewish, I'm Palestinian, can show that. You know what that tells me? It's like that story of those boys. If they took genetics tests, they'll show that they're Martinicans. Well, these are ultimately the same people killing one another because of a crazy way of looking at their identity that make them enemies. Now, it seems to me that if we want any future, and this is why I think Israel-Palestine conflict is important, it's not just about Israel-Palestine. All humanity right now face the question of whether we're going to develop values and organization of power for humanity for the 21st into the 22nd century and beyond. We can't keep living like we're in some past ancient way in which people didn't even have the technologies we have, as if we are in this big planet with plenty of room. The truth of the matter is, we're in a smaller planet. If you can get to anywhere in the planet under a day, our ancestors, it took years. If you can go across space in a short amount of time, space shrinks. If you want to talk to somebody right now in the West Bank, in Tel Aviv, in Tokyo, or in the North Pole, you just open your cell phone and you do it.
One touch, I can do this.
You can do it. We need values that fit that world. And not only that, people are moving around. If we get rid of these nation-state nonsense, you don't have refugees anymore because there's nowhere people are illegal. You don't have illegal immigrants because people belong on the planet. There are a lot of you don't haves. And you can actually do things about climate crisis. You could do things about slavery, because it's the vulnerability that enables people to be preyed upon. Right now, people are being all self-righteous. Dark-skinned Africans are going through so much as they are trying to move through Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, etc. You look at what's happening in Somalia, Sudan, and again, a lot of people are just ignoring this. These are things that are a function of these very problematic, and I argue, ultimately right-wing organization of the world. Now, I said something last night that I said breaks my heart. Because I said there's a new kind of right wing. There's not just the traditional fascist right wing, but there is now a right wing left. A right wing left is a left so full of hate that they will even make allies with people of hate just to go against the people they hate, and those people will then go against them. And we've seen that. We talked about Fanon. Fanon's heart was broken before he died, because he was witnessing a lot of, he imagined a non-nation state Algeria, where everybody belongs. As it was clear they were going to win the war, a reductive, right-wing, Islamic Arabism began to push out the Berbers, the Jews, the Christians, blacks, any other type to dominate. And that's why he wrote in the book that nationalism slide into racism. Ali Shariati from Iran was similar to Fanon. He was a left who thought he could work with the right-wing Islamicists to create a larger group to get rid of the capitalists, the Shahists, all of that, right? Well, what did that group do? When they got the power, they started going against the secularists, the Jews, the others, etc.
LGBT, feminism.
All of that. So the thing that we have to say is, since our values, right, another left values, that we want LGBTQ people to live with dignity and respect. We want to have a world in which women are living with dignity and respect, in which people of different religions, if you want to be religious, fine, can live with dignity and respect. For people who want no religion, they're like, I don't follow it, to live with dignity and respect. And the list is longer. Or new kinds of people may pop up, right? If that's what we want, then we need to do the hard political work of building a global planet in which those values can thrive.
Luis, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here with you. A gente conversou hoje com o Lewis Gordon, autor do livro O Medo da Consciência Negra, um filósofo, professor norte-americano, coordena os estudos afro-judaicos da Universidade de Connecticut, correctly?
Yes, University of Connecticut.
Escreve também sobre gastronomia, é músico, multiartista. Se você gostou dessa entrevista, não deixe de deixar o seu like, o seu comentário aqui no vídeo. Não deixe de seguir o IB aqui em todas as redes sociais. E até mais. Um abraço. Tchau, tchau.
Tchau, tchau.